Okay, so mastication. Mastication is process of the uh, sympathetic mechanism, systemic mechanical breakdown of food into the mouth. Okay, mastication is the process of systemic mechanical breakdown of the food into the mouth. Mastication breaks up large food particles, mixing them with the salivary secretions and aiding subsequent digestion. Okay, it will breaks the large food particles, mixing them with the salivary secretion and aiding subsequent digestion. Certain foods require more chewing than others, like red meat or chicken, compared to fish, eggs, or rice, in order to be fully digested and absorbed by the gastrointestinal tract. Okay, mastication involves the coordinated activity of teeth, jaw muscle, temporomandibular joint, tongue, and other structures such as lips, palate, and the salivary gland. Okay, mastication involves the coordinated activity of the teeth, jaw muscle, temporomandibular joint, tongue, lips, palate, and the salivary gland. During the mastication, three main pairs of glands secrete the saliva: parotid, submandibular, and the sublingual. Okay, parotid, submandibular, and the sublingual gland secretes the saliva. Okay, at rest, saliva is predominantly produced by the submandibular gland. 65 percentage, with only 20 percentage from the parotid gland. Okay, but when the stimulated saliva is increasingly produced by the parotid gland, about 50 percentage, compared to the only 30 percentage from the submandibular gland. Okay, at rest the saliva is produced by mostly 65 percentage by the submandibular gland and only 20 percentage from the parotid gland. But when the stimulated, 50 percentage is secreted by the parotid gland and only 30 percentage is secreted by the submandibular gland. The parotid gland produces more watery, uh, proteinaceous saliva, rich in electrolyte and enzymes, with little mucus compared to the submandibular gland. Okay, the parotid gland will secrete the more watery proteinaceous saliva. Okay, rich in the electrolyte and the enzyme, while the submandibular secretion will contain more mucus. Okay, following mastication, the tongue propels the bolus of food along the palate towards the pharynx. Okay, after mastication, the food is propelled by the tongue against the palate towards the pharynx, initiating the swallowing reflex, and it will initiate the swallowing reflex. Now, phase of gastric secretion. Okay, phase of gastric secretion. So the stimulation of gastric secretion occurs in three phases. Okay, stimulation of the gastric secretion occurs in the three phase: cephalic phase, gastric phase, and the intestinal phase. Okay, so the cephalic phase is the shortest phase, and is initiated by the sight, smell, and the taste of food. Okay, sight, smell, and taste of the food, mediated by the activation of the vagus nerve, and its action on the enteric plexus. Okay, it usually begins before the meal and lasts up to 30 minutes into the meal. Okay, acid secretion is upregulated by acetylcholine. Acid secretion is upregulated by the acetylcholine released from the prostaglandin parasympathetic fibers in the mesenteric plexus. Okay, prostaglandin parasympathetic fibers in the mesenteric plexus, directly by the stimulating parietal cells, and indirectly by the stimulating this release of the gastrin from the G cells, and histamine from the enterochromaffin cells, which themselves also upregulate acid secretion from the parietal cell. So, cephalic phase. Cephalic phase is the shortest phase, and is initiated by the sight, smell, and taste of the food, and mediated by the activation of the vagus nerve and its action on the enteric plexus. It usually begins before the meal and lasts up to 30 minutes into the meal. Acid secretion is regulated by the acetylcholine released from the prostaglandin. Okay, acetylcholine released from the prostaglandin parasympathetic fiber. Okay, uh, acid secretion by the acetylcholine. Okay, in the mesenteric plexus, which act directly by the stimulating parietal cells and indirectly by stimulating the release of the gastrin. Okay, it also stimulates the release of gastrin from the G cells and histamine from the enterochromaffin cells. Okay, it will stimulate the parietal cell for the gastrin and the enterochromaffin cell for the histamine, which themselves also upregulate the acid secretion from the parietal cells. Okay, now the gastric phase. So the gastric phase is the longest phase, lasting for up to 3 hours after the start of the meal. Okay, it is triggered by digestion of the stomach and the chemical composition of the food. Okay, it triggered by the distension of the stomach and the chemical composition of the food. Distension of the stomach and the chemical composition of the food, it will trigger most acid secretion takes place during this phase. Okay, most acid secretion takes place during this phase, and the food in the stomach is converted to the stomach food converted to the chyme. Okay, mechanoceptors in the stomach wall are stretched. Mechanoceptors in the stomach wall are stretched and set up local mesenteric and central vagovagal cholinergic reflex. Okay, mechanoceptors in the stomach wall are stretched and set up local mesenteric and the central vagovagal cholinergic reflex. Set up local mesenteric in the central vagovagal mesenteric plexus, cholinergic reflexes. Okay, both causes the release of acetylcholine, which stimulates the release of the gastrin, histamine, and in turn acid, pepsinogen, and the mucus. Okay, mechanoceptors in the stomach wall stretched and set up local mesenteric and the central vagovagal cholinergic reflexes. Both causes the release of acetylcholine, which stimulate the release of the gastrin, histamine. Okay, acetylcholine. Okay, will release the gastrin and histamine, and in turn acid, pepsinogen, and the mucus. Stimulation of the vagus nerve also stimulates the release of the gastrin releasing peptide, which may mainly act directly on the G cells to release the gastrin. Okay, whole proteins do not affect the gastric secretion. Whole protein do not affect the gastric secretion directly, but the presence of their breakdown products, amino acid peptides, directly stimulate the gastrin release from the antral G cells. Okay, pH in the stomach inhibits gastrin secretion. Okay, inhibit the pH in the low pH in the stomach will inhibit the gastrin secretion. Therefore, when the stomach is empty or when acid has been secreted for some time after food has entered it, uh, there is inhibition of the acid secretion. Okay, however, when food first enters the stomach, the pH rises, and this leads to release of the inhibition and causes maximum secretion of the gastrin. Thus the gastric acid secretion is self-regulating. Okay, acid secretion is the self-regulating. Now, intestinal phase. The intestinal phase is brought about by chyme entering the duodenum through the pyloric sphincter. Initially, there is a continuation of the gastric stimulation, okay, due to the activation of the intestinal G cells by amino acid and peptides in chyme, with subsequent gastrin release. However, this is short-lived as the duodenum becomes more distended with further gastric emptying, and a series of reflexes is initiated which inhibit further release of the gastric secretion. Secretion is released in response to acid stimulation. Okay, secretin is released in response to acid stimulation, which reaches the stomach via bloodstream, and inhibit the release of gastrin. Okay, the presence of fatty acids in the duodenum itself stimulate the release of the gastric inhibitory peptide and cholecystokinin, okay, which inhibit the release of the both gastrin and the acid. Together with the mechanoreceptor in the duodenum via vagal and the local reflex pathway, the release of the secretin and the cholecystokinin also play a role in the regulation of the gastric emptying. Okay, now we will discuss about the protein handling. Okay, so the protein is composed of amino acid linked by the peptide bound. Okay, is composed of the amino acid linked by the peptide bound. Nine amino acids are essential required from diet for protein synthesis and nitrogen balance. Okay, nine essential proteins are there, which should be taken in the diet, and okay, and for protein synthesis and for the nitrogen balance. The other necessary amino acids can be manufactured in the body. Okay, protein provides about the same amount of energy as carbohydrate, but are not as easily utilized. Okay, it not easily utilized. So the protein requirement of the normal healthy adult is about 40 gram per day. Protein requirement of normal adult is about 40 gram per day. Protein is digested in the stomach and small intestine. It is digested in the stomach and the small intestine, and its normal daily requirement is 40 gram per day. Protein digestion. Digestion of the dietary protein begins in the stomach, where the pepsin uh, hydrolyzes protein to the polypeptide, and continues in the duodenum, where pancreatic protease, trypsin, and the chymotrypsin continue the process of hydrolysis, forming oligopeptide. Hydrolysis will be done here and form the oligopeptide. These are further broken down into the small peptides and amino acids by the pancreatic carboxypeptidase and aminopeptidase located on the luminal membrane epithelial cells. Okay, we'll further divide into small peptides and the amino acids by the pancreatic carboxypeptidase and the aminopeptidase. Okay, free amino acid are absorbed by secondary active transport coupled with sodium transport. Okay, free amino acid are absorbed free amino acid are absorbed by secondary active transport coupled with sodium transport. Okay, free amino acid are absorbed secondary to the active transport with sodium transport. Amino acid cross the basal membrane into the capillaries by facilitated diffusion. Okay, amino acid cross the basal membrane into the capillaries by facilitated diffusion. Now saliva. So site of production, the three main pairs of the gland, parotid, submandibular, and the sublingual gland, secrete the saliva. About 1 to 2 liter of the saliva is produced per day, and almost it's swallowed and absorbed. Salivary gland contribution at rest and the contribution when stimulated. Okay, as we have seen earlier. Okay, composition. So saliva is hypotonic and alkaline. Saliva is the hypotonic and alkaline, and contains a mixture of both uh, I, inorganic and the organic constitution. Okay, mixture of both inorganic and the organic constituents. Saliva composition varies according to the rate and site of the production. But the main components are the water, mucus. Water is the 99%, then mucus, digestive enzymes like amylase, lingual lipase, and the antibacterial enzymes like lysozymes, then secretory immunoglobulins like IgA, and the electrolytes high potassium and the bicarb concentration. Okay, saliva contain both inorganic and the organic constituents. Okay, and it's contain water 99%, then mucus, then digestive enzymes like amylase and the lingual lipase, then the antibacterial enzymes like lysozymes, then secretory immunoglobulins like IgA, and the electrolytes like high potassium and bicarb concentration. Okay, then control of secretion. Secretion of the saliva is under the control of the autonomic nervous system. This is there is baseline level of secretion about 0.5 ml per minute due to ongoing low level parasympathetic stimulation which prevent the mouth and pharynx from the drying out. Okay, there is a low level of the parasympathetic stimulation is there, so about 0.5 ml per minute is secreted baseline in at the baseline level in the mouth, so it prevents the mouth and pharynx from drying out. On top of the baseline, increases in saliva